I use the phrase courage is contagious. Courage is, it's transferable. It multiplies. You can hear a story from halfway around the world of somebody you've never met, and it'll inspire you to do something where you are.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy. And you might have noticed that we have moved away from the Animal Farm and Lord of the Rings part of the Doomsday syllabus and straight into Fahrenheit 451. But with shredders.
Yeah, that's right. This week, the Washington Post reported on Anthropic's top secret Project Panama, which involved buying up rare copies of books in mass, feeding them to their AI models, and then, that's right, destroying them.
So you're telling me that we're literally feeding rare human intelligence into the AI models and then destroying it so that no one else can have it in order to get, I don't know, like cat cartoons and like weird hallucinated shit? Great, Marcus. Just great. It really does give new meaning to the term rapacious capitalism.
Does it ever, Nora? Does it ever? I'm just hoping this is the last straw for all the librarians and historians out there. So fingers crossed that they're texting each other right at this very moment saying, grab your tote bags, we ride at dawn.
Heck yes. Yes. I can't think of anyone I'd rather follow into the revolution than a librarian.
Me too, Nora, me too. Well, I'll say unless sentient news, shall we say, another smiley photo of Mitch McConnell and his wife, Elaine Chao, dropped this week, causing even his supporters to think, yeah, he's either brain dead or he's dead.
Yes. Among those not buying it is Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who said McConnell must prove he's alive with, I guess, a better AI fake or resign. Ultimately, it is up to Majority Leader John Thune to investigate and, if needed, appoint someone new.
And Republicans being who they are, what's a little vegetative state to keep them from clinging to power? I mean, if a felon can be president, Nora, then can't a dead guy be a senator?
I mean,
logic to me.
Fair point. Yeah. On the topic of dead senators and also our felon in chief, Trump this week also attended Lindsey Graham's funeral, where he went completely off of script and said not everybody liked that guy and that Graham never saw a war he didn't like, which true, fair.
Those are not in the prepared remarks is what you're saying. I did not know that. That's wow.
Yeah. And then he sat down and he took his nap. Because our country is being run by someone who acts like he escaped from the memory care facility, tossed his meds, and stole a car. And that's on a good day.
And those days are few and far between. Far between.
Yes.
But also vying for top spot on the list of graceless psychopaths this week is, of course, the one and only Elon Musk. He's been spiraling after a particularly disastrous interview with the editor of The Economist and having to watch a movie that didn't even have an all-white cast. My goodness gracious.
Elon, I know. I really hope Musk's therapist is telling him things like, now, Elon, everyone has times where they feel like the whole world is against them, but it's actually true in your case. No, but who am I kidding? Musk doesn't go to therapy.
No, he does not. I mean, why go to therapy when you can take out your anger issues on the entire world via X, right?
I mean, yeah. I suppose that eventually we're all going to be okay with him colonizing Mars because at least we'll get to get rid of him. Like, go torment some rocks and minerals, Elon. But all kidding aside, this week's news was really overshadowed, especially for us here in Seattle, with a mass shooting at the Seattle Center Sunday night. 3 people were left dead and several others injured, including a 2-year-old child.
Yes, so far, one suspect has been arrested, a 15-year-old boy. And I'll repeat that again, 15. It's an indictment not of an individual, but of an entire system. A system that let him acquire a gun, that left him without other means to settle an argument, and that left him at the center of a tragedy.
Yeah, and Marcus has a really beautiful column out about the incident and the grief that arises not just from this particular incident, but from knowing all of the other deaths by gunfire in our city that do not get such attention and outrage. And I won't do it justice here, so I'll just say that you should read it, and it's linked in our show notes.
I thank you, Nora. Just appreciate that so much. I quite frankly just wish that I never had to write it. That
Yeah.
said, I was also reminded this week of Renee Hopkins' interview with us. Renee is the CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, which I am also a board member of, just for full disclosure. And she talked with us about the outrage she felt after mass shootings.
Yeah, I remember that. She said that her outrage was not just in response to the mass shooting, but an outrage that we are not horrified all the time about all forms of gun violence every single day.
I also recall her talking about how the line between a victim of gun violence and a perpetrator of gun violence is extremely thin. And I was thinking about that a lot this week, covering the news in Seattle.
Yeah, it's such an important point, especially in this case. Well, Marcus, I know it has been a really tough reporting week, but your voice and perspective has been very welcome.
Yeah, it's the poorly paid job that I hate to love, Nora. Gotta laugh to keep from crying, I guess. There's plenty of tears to go around. But meanwhile, it has also been a rough summer for many outside Seattle, too. There are wildfires spreading literally across all corners of the globe, with Native and First Nations communities being especially hard hit.
Yeah, and I keep thinking, like, as much as I love our summers here in the Pacific Northwest, I've also kind of had to come to realize and expect that summers are like this season of grief, because we see so much climate-related destruction and disaster every summer. I'm probably not alone in this, but sometimes it can feel like way too much, which I think is why I'm so glad that we have a particular guest this week with us, Paul Loeb.
Yes, indeed. Paul is here to speak with us about a brand new edition of his book, The Impossible Will Take a Little While: Perseverance and Hope in Troubled Times. Paul is like a prophet of hope rather than doom, collecting stories of people who have persevered and held on to the fight in the toughest of times, from political prisoners in apartheid South Africa and Russia to those who staff suicide hotlines. It's a collection of hard-earned wisdom about getting through and even winning. Yes, winning when everything feels impossible.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Marcus, but this is the conversation that I needed this week. I picked up the original version of Paul's book in 2004 when it came out during the Bush presidency, and I thought my life was over. And it honestly gave me a set of ways of thinking about the world that I'm quite sure saved me from a lifetime of pessimism. What's really magical about this book is it collects stories not of people deluding themselves into optimism, but really of honestly looking at how horrible the world is around them and then just deciding to try something anyway.
It is absolutely an honor to have Paul Loeb with us on the show this week. He has spent 50 years researching and writing about citizen responsibility and empowerment, asking what makes some people choose lives of social commitment. He's the author of several books, including Soul of a Citizen and Hope in Hard Times. In addition to his writing, he founded and led the Campus Election Engagement Project, a nationwide effort to help students engage in elections. Just so that the listeners know, I did unfortunately have to step away towards the tail end of this interview to handle an emergency, but Nora more than made up in my stead.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us. It's really an honor to have you on and to chat with you about this new edition of the book.
I'm really excited.
Well, maybe let's actually start with the title. I know the title hasn't changed from earlier editions, but why are you invoking the impossible in the title? And what do you hope that people take from the sort of long time frame that you point to in the title of the book?
It's a book on political hope. And you're dealing with the question of hope, and people will say, we are just in a terrible situation and everything looks bleak, and I'm just not sure it's worthwhile to try and do anything. And so when I was originally, and the book has, as you know, an interesting history because there's about 125,000 copies out there over a 20-year period, and lots of people like you, Nora, read it in college and that kind of thing. And when I was looking around for a title, it was like there was a Billie Holiday song called, the song is called "Crazy He Calls Me." But the line is the difficult will do it once, the impossible will take a little while. And it just grabbed me. And I just thought, besides the fact that it evoked Billie Holiday, it was just like, this sums it up. You can't do everything you want in the time frames you want necessarily. Sometimes they're hugely impactful, as in, an election. But you persist enough, all sorts of things end up happening. But after I did the first edition, I got an email from a person who was the son of the songwriter, and he said, "Just wanted you to know the history is that my dad, when he was writing, he started the song before World War II, and he got stuck because sometimes you get stuck, and then he was in his like." It was the motto of the Navy CBs and I think the Army Corps of Engineers. He's in his like mess hall and he sees it on the wall and he's
Hmm.
like, "That's it. That's how I can finish the song." And he
I
said, "I
love
just
that.
thought you would be curious to know that history." And I said, "This is great. It will go in the next edition of the book." But it's just, I love the title. And again, I didn't write the words, but it sings every time I hear it.
I know it's not Billie Holiday, but it actually reminds me of a line by Jay-Z where he says, "Difficult takes a day and impossible takes a week." But
Exact,
I just,
yeah, exact same concept.
yeah,
And you know that Jay-Z has listened to Billie Holiday. I
yeah,
mean, you just know
absolutely,
that. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Uh, well, I want to ask, you this edition of the book certainly advances a specific argument about hope. That it's not just about believing in a better world, but a much more pragmatic sense that our small actions both matter and are worth it. So as we struggle towards a better world, I want to ask you, what led you to believe in this version of hope?
It's a good question. Um, because it's not as if I'm immune from the tides of history and the ups and the downs and the devastation when somebody is horrible just gets reelected and I mean I feel that the same way everybody else does. So I think it was my years, because they are now years or decades even, of working in social change movements and seeing people do something where they they don't know if it's going to work. In fact, there is every reason for them to assume that it's not going to work, and they do it anyway. And there's a distinction that the former Czech dissident Václav Havel and later Czech president makes, and he made it in an essay written while he was still under the communist dictatorship, before the Berlin Wall falls and things loosen up in Eastern Europe and all the rest of that. And he basically said hope is different from optimism. Optimism is believing that things are going to turn out the way you want them to. And hope is something deeper that drives you to act even if you're uncertain about the first. And I really liked that because you don't really know. And we all, including me, will use this phrase, well, are you hopeful about the elections? Yeah, I'm more hopeful than I was a week ago because I read the poll numbers and poll numbers are looking better. I'll use it, in that general way to really mean, am I optimistic about it? But the real hope is, even if it's looking bad, and even if in this particular battle it's going to turn out badly, nonetheless, the only way that things are going to change is if we all work towards that.
Hmm. Yeah. It reminds me of what Miriam Kaba says about hope being a discipline, that it's something we work at and practice. Um,
I like that.
but I think one of the other things that the authors in this book seem to be arguing is that hope is sometimes the most necessary when it exists, as I think Jim Wallace puts it in the book, in spite of the evidence. So, what is it about imagination and even what we might think of as sort of like magical thinking that enables these change makers that are in the book to persist in these really impossible circumstances?
Yeah, I like Wallace's phrasing. He says, hope is believing in spite of the evidence and then watching the evidence change. And if we've stuck around long enough, we will have seen that in various circumstances. And I'm certainly will have seen bad evidence. Again, one of the things that I've struggled with in this edition, probably even more than the first, because the first was written for George Bush, and I thought it was bad, and it really was bad. And
we had no idea how bad it could get.
That was nothing, So I think that having that perspective, it's just so critical to say, yeah, we don't know where things are going to turn. But again, one of the things I do in the book is I assemble a lot of stories, and a lot of them are stories from the past, because they're not all of them. I mean, sometimes the past is as recent as the stopping of the coup in South Korea right after Trump got reelected, December 24, where people just like surrounded the parliament to protect the parliament. Soldiers disobeyed their orders. I loved the ones where they refused to issue ammunition because they said, "Oh, we have to keep a certain amount of ammunition at our depot, so you're not allowed to. We can't issue any ammunition." And somebody else said, "We can't give you authorization to have the helicopters take off to try and go to the parliament to implement the coup." And then maybe my favorite was a group of soldiers who were deployed again to seize the parliament and implement the coup, and they stopped for ramen noodles instead, which I really like. And so that's an example from the recent past. And the advantage of, going back even as far as the abolitionist movement to slavery is you get to see movements that looked impossible at the time, or the apartheid movement in South Africa, or the movements against the Eastern European communist dictatorships. You get to see how history turned out. And that actually sometimes it turns out okay. I mean, or at least you make progress. And but if they'd assumed from the get-go that there's nothing you can do, and I go back to Havel because people, including people who didn't like the regime, just were mocking what he was doing. It was like, this is not going to make any difference. They did a petition to free prisoners who were, political prisoners who were in jail. And everybody's like, this is not going to make any difference. They're not going to go along with it. And in fact, the prisoners weren't freed. But when they got out, they said, knowing about that petition, that was really important for us. That allowed us to keep our morale. And, that's in some sense similar to, I don't know, people in ICE detention who know that there are people out there, that they've not been neglected. That there are people out there who are fighting for them. So in any kind of circumstance, it allows a sense of human solidarity, maybe is the word. And it allows that sense of human solidarity to keep people going. And if they do stay and they do keep going, then history can change.
Yeah, I love the examples that you gave just there, but there's also a very profound and poignant example in the book about your friend Lisa,
Right.
who was a nuclear testing protester. Um, I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing that story, or at least a story, I should say, to
Yeah,
our
it's
listeners.
funny. This is a friend of mine who named Lisa Petey, who actually was a renowned anthropologist, but that wasn't really relevant to, she got at MIT and kind of pioneered sort of community center planning in urban areas. I mean, she's really important. But at this point, it was like a long time. It was like the early 60s. And she when they were protesting nuclear testing, and because of the radiation and the impact on, particularly on mothers and their kids. And she went to Washington, D.C. with a group of women, and it was raining, and their signs were soggy, and they were drenched, and she was feeling just completely hopeless because what are we doing here? It is not going to make any difference. No one is going to be watching. It was just this quintessential moment of futility. And then a few years later, that particular movement had grown, and she was at a big rally, and there was a person people now may or may not remember, but named Benjamin Spock, who was the most famous baby doctor in the world. I
Yes,
think he
Dr.
sold
Spock. Yeah.
yeah, he sold, yeah, not Star Trek, the first Dr. Spock. He sold 50 million books. Every parent was raising their kids. And so when he started out speaking about the nuclear arms race and then later on about Vietnam, it was just huge. And so Spock is speaking and she's listening, kind of, you know how you're at a rally and you're listening to speakers and you're listening to them, but most of the time you're kind of half distracted because that's just the way it is. And then he starts talking about witnessing. He's talking about why he got involved, and he talks about the issue itself. But he also says that there was this small group of women in Washington, D.C., and I was passing them, and it was raining. They were out there in the rain, and I thought, they just seem so dedicated to be out there in the rain. What's their cause? It must be really important. And so he credited her tiny, futile, despairing group for getting him involved. And I just thought, what a great story. And I was looking at like, okay, this story is really long ago now. I mean, do I still keep it in there? But then the lesson still persists. You can feel like nothing's mattering. It doesn't make any difference. This was just a waste of time. And yet you can be influencing somebody and you never know what the ripples are going to be from that.
Yeah, I love that story. Um, you also have a story in the new edition of book. It actually opens up with a scene in which you find Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who'd recently been just diagnosed with prostate cancer, sort of dancing with abandon in the midst of an event at Los Angeles. And as someone who was lucky enough to see the Archbishop speak on several occasions in Cape Town in South Africa, I know exactly what you're talking about. He had a sort of joie de vivre that like was always present with him. And you use that example to talk about sort of the importance of joy and pleasure and how that figures into the sort of perseverance and resilience that you're hoping to cultivate. How have you seen joy be really important in the movements that you've covered?
It's a good question. He does because I've also seen him several times, though not in Cape Town, um, and he does exemplify joy. It's like he loves to dance. And there are people would say, yeah, everybody knows the Arch is always dancing,
Yes.
and because I was there and it was like this event at this kind of fancy, it was like one of these fancy Brentwood, LA man, Hollywood producer type things, and like Martin Sheen was there and Sharon Stone, all these celebrities and stuff. And people gave their talks as they always did. And then suddenly I look over and like his music starts, and you know how people are a little bit shy about dancing when the music starts, and he just jumps right in. And I'm thinking, I've never seen a Nobel Peace Prize winner dance before. This is very interesting. And it's this sense of like seize every opportunity. If there is good music, he's going to be there dancing. If there's good food, he's going to be enjoying it. If there's good conversation, he's going to be part of it. If there's a joke, he's going to be laughing or making it. It's this sense that certainly no one could say about Desmond Tutu, oh, well, he led a really sheltered, insulated life. He doesn't know how bad the world really can be. He knows how bad the world really can be, in the deepest way, because of South Africa witnessing the slaughter of Rwanda. I mean, no one has, witnessed something in that way as much as he has or more. And yet he's joyful. He's grabbing life. And part of what happens, I think, is that when bad things happen, we feel like we need to be glum. And I mean, it's hard. I mean, like, I don't know if you had this experience, but you would, after Trump gets elected in this last first year and his second year, and you ask a friend, you haven't seen a friend in a while, how are you? Normal, normal opening. Well, I mean, except for what's going on in the world, I'm doing okay. And that that just weighs on us. But going into that kind of bleakness doesn't help. So what really helps is approaching it with joy, approaching our activity, approaching our social change activity with joy. So hey, we get to be with good people, manifesting courage. That's really important. We can draw joy from that. We can draw joy from the richness of the world, and we've got it in the impossible. There's this wonderful poem by Wendell Berry talking about, I'm gonna mess up his words, but basically, yeah, when the world is weighing on me, I go and I see these beautiful birds and this beautiful landscape, and something lightens in my soul. And I felt
Yeah.
that. I mean, I will go down and I will go by the water and I'll feel better. I will go, in some forest. I will get sustenance from nature. I'll get sustenance from just gathering with friends. I'll get sustenance from hearing music and dancing to it. And so there's that, there's the sustenance from the world. And there's also the sustenance from, I mean, King called it the beloved community. And what's interesting to me is that when, say, veterans of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement were being interviewed, and they would say, this was the best time of my life. And I'm thinking, wait a moment, you were jailed, you were beaten, some of you were sprayed with water hoses, you saw comrades die, and you're saying it was the best moment of your life? And they would say, well, because it was seeing humanity at its best. It was that sense of courage. And I think those of us, whether or not we've gone through those kinds of extreme costs for our actions, I think most of us who've been involved have those moments where you're just doing something and you know it matters and you're with a group of good people and you just value that. I mean, ironically, it's the same as soldiers putting their unit on their graves from World War II or something, because that was that moment where they felt that something they did matter, even though they were getting shot at or wounded or whatever. So I think drawing strength from that is valuable.
Yeah, Paul, thank you so much for saying that. I don't know if you knew how much your words would land, I think with many of our listeners. But we do also have a ton of listeners in the Seattle area. And obviously, as I'm sure you know, there was a shooting on Sunday at one of
Yeah.
our largest, food festivals at the Bite of Seattle. And just to your point about people sort of reflexively, retreating to glumness, and sort of the worst instincts that we have many times. And, I hope that with your words and so many other words that I'm hearing around, that people can maybe try to reach for the best of us. And as you said, sort of manifest hope, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife was there seeing a movie that afternoon. A friend was there with his kids. I think part of the challenge these days is that you can be living a normal life and there can be a shooting. You could be, well, not just Europe, but in the US, there can be wildfires suddenly
Yeah.
out of control from climate change. And the air looks like the cover of a dystopian science fiction novel. And that's part of our lives now.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so unfortunate. Which is also why your words and your work are ever important. With that said, I do want to sort of move from locally to Seattle to the world, as there are many new additions in your volume that in this volume, I should say, that comes from voices from across the world, including places like South Korea and the Russian resistance movements. And so I'm wondering, what lessons do you hope um, the American readers can draw from the examples in your book?
You see, it's interesting because it is a fairly the stories are fairly international. Um, and the one thread, I think, is that courage, I use the phrase courage is contagious. Courage is, it's transferable, it multiplies. You can hear a story from halfway around the world of somebody you've never met, and it'll inspire you to do something where you are. And it may be an act of, I was going to use the word extreme courage. That is something that was extraordinarily difficult, and it may inspire you to go knock on a door in an election or make some phone calls. And the most impactful thing you might be able to do in that in the current circumstances is knock on the door or make those phone calls. So it's not even as if you have to do the exact same kind of thing. But the sense that says, I'm not going to give up, I'm going to act, even in a context where things are uncertain, that's transferable from one place to another. And so when I was putting the impossible will take a little while together, it just seemed to me, and does even more so now, that you want these examples from all over the world because you see people facing different circumstances.
Yeah, and you have these like beautiful moments where you kind of trace these chains of inspiration and influence between different movements across the world, the way the civil rights movement in the US inspired anti-apartheid activists in South Africa, and how these groups are kind of learning from each other over time. And I think that's a really special thing that you can kind of trace out through the contents of the book.
Yeah, I mean, again, when I see those chains of influence, I think is what I call them. I like them because you don't really know at the early stages, you have no idea what the ramifications are going to be. You're just doing something, you're hoping it's going to make a difference. And then all of a sudden, again, this is true with the Lisa story, but in the book itself, there's hundreds of other stories where you do something, you don't know how it's going to land, how it's going to ripple out, and then it actually has an impact in really consequential and unexpected ways.
Yeah, yeah. Let's pivot and talk about some of the more kind of personal, kind of localized, individual level changes that some people are talking about in the book as well, because I think these are equally important. I was personally really moved by an essay in the book by Diane Ackerman called A Slender Thread about working for a suicide hotline. And I'm just going to content warning for our listeners that we are going to mention suicide for a couple of minutes. She writes in that essay that people contemplating suicide have tunnel vision, as she puts it. No other choice seems possible, and that her job as a counselor is to put windows and doors in that tunnel.
It's a dark tunnel, and she wants to let light in.
Yeah, and I don't want to equate our current situation in the US with suicide, but you do write that this is a book for, as you put it, harder and meaner times. And so I guess
Very much harder. I mean, again, Bush looks good in comparison.
So much harder and meaner.
Terrible.
So I guess I want to ask you, where do you hope to see the windows and the doors in the tunnel of our current situation? And how do you kind of hope to have the book build some of those windows and doors?
Good question. I go back to Ackerman, and I love that essay because it really is. And she's on the phone to somebody who is deciding whether or not to jump off a bridge to her death. And and she knows that. And so the life and death is just immediate. It's in her, it's in the person's hands, but also to some degree it's in her hands, and she's aware of that responsibility. And again, I love the metaphor because the tunnel of darkness where you can't see any alternative. Everything is foreclosed. That does often feel like the world that we're living in or the country that we're living in. They have all the cards, they have all the power. I think that people may feel it a little tiny bit less acutely than they did a year ago before, or a year and a half ago before the sort of resistance started to find its footing, but it's still there. And their capacity of that administration to do unconstrained by any internal moral restraints, in which they've said it's just, oh, it's whatever I think is right. So constrained in ways sometimes though by that they don't expect. I mean, I look at something like Minneapolis, and we actually the book went to press before or was finished before Minneapolis was happening, but Chicago was happening before Minneapolis, and LA, Portland before Chicago. And so we talked about the very similar ICE resistance in those cities. And what was interesting to me is that these are very ordinary people, and they were rising to the occasion, which actually included having the discipline not to take up arms against, say, the ICE folks, because a couple of times people have done that, it has been a disaster. And so they instinctively knew that that would just be, all that would do is give Trump excuse to crush everything that he opposes. And so by resisting nonviolently, with this courage, I don't think anybody can look at Minneapolis and not see it as a defeat for the administration and a victory for human dignity, even though horrible stuff continues. They're still picking people up, lots and lots of bad, but nonetheless, the war, to use the metaphor, is not over. But that was a victory, and may act again. I'm using a military metaphor, but sometimes these things also have consequences, and so maybe that will be looked at as the equivalent of Stalingrad or the various or North Africa or the turning points in World War II where the Nazis were actually stopped, and so I think that the window, going back to the original question, the tunnel is the belief that they, whoever the they is at a given point in context, hold all the power. The windows are the stories of possibility that contradict that say, no, actually, they don't.
One of the other things that I really appreciate about this book, and I kind of saw myself in this as a professor who often assigns things to my students that I'm like, you're going to disagree with this, but I want you to read it anyways, is that you sort of acknowledge that there are voices in the collection that not all readers may agree with, or that that readers might be deeply uncomfortable with. I guess I'm interested in like your decisions about what to include and what to leave out, and how much to push readers into a zone of discomfort without losing them.
Well, I have thought of, so I'm thinking, for instance, which I said, I think I explicitly talked about, it's a fairly short piece by the Catholic, I guess you're sort of theologian, Omri Nouwen, who pioneered the concept of I think somebody else had invented, but he really spread of the wounded healer. It was just an extraordinarily useful concept for people because it says that you don't have to be perfect and you can have your human flaws. And so somebody are respected. And the piece I chose to excerpt was about his relationship with, I think his name was Adam, with a man who could not speak and could not see, and was basically the ways that you would having a human interchange couldn't happen. And you could touch him, and he could respond with a hand to that touch. But he talked about the richness that he got from that. And in the process of this essay, he talked about protecting life, the life of somebody like Adam, and the value of it. and also the life in the womb. And so that sort of put him in the anti-abortion camp. And I think he also talked about people on death row. It was a consistent argument, but it was not the one that I happened to agree with. And I keynoted a Planned Parenthood convention once, so I, I believe pretty strongly in the right to choose. So the question is, do I include that? And I thought, well, do I get something from this essay? I do. Do I take some of its lessons differently? I also do. Would my readers? I think they would. So that would be an example of something where I might not agree with everything, don't agree with everything he wrote in the piece, but nonetheless, it felt like it added value. And it got some, and it was something unique that it didn't just replicate other pieces. So
Yeah.
that's an example.
Yeah. I think one of the other examples that you talk about in the book is the challenge of your decision to keep an essay by Sherman Alexie in this edition. Sherman Alexie, who had a number of accusations of sexual harassment and sexual exploitation against him. I guess I want to ask specifically, like, what message do you hope that that choice of retention will give to readers about harm and failings and the wounded healers among us and redemption in those we look up to? Because this is a conversation we keep having as a society around cancellation.
The essay was something no, it's not an essay, it's a story. I think it's the only piece of fiction in the book. And it's this wildly, in my view, powerful story about a couple who are watching their son hover at death's door. And they're trying everything they're in the hospital, they're trying everything to bring it back. And it's, I've gotten a lot of, well, because without going into all the details, they end up like waving these dildos around. It's just this wild story. And it's also emotionally heartbreaking story. And it's emotionally powerful. And originally, the very first edition, I was like, do I bring this in? Am I going to lose? Am I going to lose a bunch of course adoptions from people who are just like, they aren't going to even go near it? And I just decided, well, I love it. So I'm going to put in there, some people don't use it, then that's fine. And then I can't remember the time, because his original book was 20 years ago. So then about a dozen years later, things emerge about Sherman. I mean, it isn't Epstein level. It's not forced, but what I would call it as abusing power in a sexual way. I mean, that was when I look what everyone said, it was like, no, he didn't force himself, but this was wrong. And he just shouldn't absolutely not have done that. And so I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, that's not good behavior. It's not something you want to emulate. And then at the same time, I'm also looking at, well, it's been, I think it was 7 years, and it's not been, okay, here's one person, and then another. It's like, okay, that did happen. He acknowledged it happened, and it's not, and it hasn't continued, and others haven't come forward. And then I saw some of his postings about the 12-step program he's part of and struggling with his own demons. And what I felt like is, this is somebody who is trying to do the work of coming to account with who he is. And that feels different from people who have sort of skated on their behavior. I mean, none of us are perfect, but all of us have done things we're proud of. Most of us done things we're proud of. Everyone's done things, at least in small ways, that we're proud of. And most of us have done things we aren't so proud of. So I think getting back to Sherman, the fact that he was acknowledging and wrestling with it made it a lot easier for me to keep in a piece that I thought was intrinsically extremely powerful and had lessons that people learned from.
Mm, yeah. I imagine that no collection like this one ever feels complete. Like you're probably always stumbling over new things that you wish you could kind
Oh,
of shove in
yes.
there. Um, so are there voices or perspectives that got left on the cutting room floor or that are missing here that you wish you could have included?
There weren't ones that got left on the cutting room floor, but there were the writer Adam Sewer from The Atlantic did an amazing piece for The Atlantic on Minneapolis and the ice resistance. It was so powerful. And I would have used it, except that I'd already handed in the book 3 months earlier. And there was just like, I couldn't have basically done it without blowing up the entire production schedule. So that would be, I think of that essay because it would have paired wonderfully with the Chicago piece that I did run. And I would have loved to have it, but it got written afterwards. Nothing I could do about it. So that would be one example that immediately comes to mind because I did really think about like, oh, maybe we could just squeeze this in, and it's like, no, we really can't.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's probably a good thing that there are further examples of really powerful resistance that you didn't have time to include that are
There's always
popping up
examples
everywhere.
there's
Yeah.
always examples of resistance. The question is whether there's pieces written about them that
Yeah,
are
that are
eloquent
stunningly
and
beautiful.
powerful, and
Yeah.
some of them it the right way. But
Yeah.
there's some of both. More
Yeah.
of the resistance and also some of the pieces written about them.
Well, one of the key lessons of this book, I think, and you kind of hinted at it earlier, is that we really can't do this work in isolation.
Absolutely.
And that, the connection is the fuel of so much resistance. And I'm thinking just of how profoundly disconnected many of us are as a society right now. What lessons did you learn about how to connect in putting together this work? And especially how to connect under really tough circumstances.
It's interesting because if I look at the process of the book, it started with people feeling really bleak, again, 20 years ago. And I was like, boy, I've addressed it some in my Soul of a Citizen book, but what if I took all the voices who most inspired me? So I literally went through my bookshelves and made this gigantic pile on the living room table and thought, oh, you could put all these voices together. And so they were people to some extent who I'd already read at the beginning. And I think had assimilated their lessons. I mean, like thinking about Mandela, 27 years in a South African prison in Robben Island, being told you'll never leave alive, and finding ways to resist, like they're denied newspapers to isolate him because again, that isolation is so key. And the guard has a tuna fish sandwich with a newspaper wrapping. And basically they see the guard, see him put in the trash, pull it out, copy on a tiny coded script in toilet paper, which is the only paper they got issued, and pass it cell to cell. So this is a story that I knew, that I remembered because it's so powerful. And oh, this is an opportunity to take that story and bring it to other people and allow them to see it. So I learned from that. And then at the same time as I started reaching out and adding new material, and there's about 60 essays, and I've got a dozen introductions that weave throughout where I get to have my own voice. And I got to think it through. I mean, so for example, one of the sections in the book was one that was sort of just radically changed. So nothing in my old introduction worked, and it was all different. And it was one where one of the sections is the entries is Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, which has always really inspired me. And I started thinking about his talk about the good people being more culpable than the white citizens councils and the Ku Klux Klan people. The good people who knew this was wrong, but nonetheless said, oh, well, wait, it's not time, all those kinds of things. And as I'm writing the introduction, I started thinking about the law firms that have capitulated to the Trump administration and the universities that have capitulated and the corporations that have capitulated and all these powerful institutions, some of which had grand mission statements. And I thought, this is exactly the same thing that King was talking about. So I would say so I wrote about those links. And of course, about those who resisted. And so the process of having to reflect on each of these essays and poems and stories, I think changed me in terms of really understanding on a deeper level what those wellspring springs of hope are and how people resist in unimaginable circumstances. So it was just very very valuable. And sometimes they come from unexpected places. So as I was preparing for the new edition, I have a large Substack which people can, subscribe if they go to impossible.org. And I just put the word out the way I had done actually the first two editions. And I said, hey, if there's anything you know of that was really good and should be in the book, let me know. And people had different suggestions, and some worked and some didn't. I'm like, I wanted to have Jane Goodall in the book. There wasn't anything that was liftable, but there was a lovely, as an essay, but there was a lovely extended passage of hers where she's reflecting on what keeps her going that I just thought was wonderful. And so that's in the book. An activist group that I'd worked with at my two nonprofits, the assistant of the director said, this is going to sound really strange, but I just read Alexei Navalny's autobiography, the Soviet dissident who died in Putin's prison, and it's very powerful and very hopeful. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of weird, but I'm going to get a copy and I'll read it. And it blew me away. So here's a situation where we know the ending. We know he died in a Siberian prison. He didn't get out. He made this fateful choice after Putin poisoned him to come back from Germany to Russia, knowing that he was almost certainly going to be jailed, and that decent chance he'd never emerge. But when you read it, he's so funny. And so he's reflecting and he's saying, hey, somebody here must have just read George Orwell's 1984 and thought, cool, we can do that. What a good idea. And he's flipping back at them, this just wild humor in every context. Oh, they really care about me. This is so nice. There's a person who's watching me all night, and he has my well-being. And so it's so nice to know that they care about you, that they've got somebody standing over your bed and they're waking me to make sure I'm okay. And you read it and it's grim battlefield humor, and it's hysterical and it's powerful. And probably of all the people in the book, Navalny made the most deliberate choice, with the likely consequences being imprisonment and quite possibly death. But you read it and it lifts your spirits.
Well, speaking of joy, maybe we can end on a joyful note. We have a practice on this show, which we like to call our 8 ounces of joy each week, where we try and end each episode by sharing something that's given us joy in the past week, even as heavy as things are. And it was a heavy one this week. Would you like to share something that has been giving you joy lately?
Well, there is a park near, maybe a mile from where I live. If people live in Seattle, they may know it. It's called Schmitz Park. If they don't, it's one of 2 places in Seattle that has old growth forest. And it's not a very big park, but it's a wonderful. It's like these huge 700-year-old trees and mosses and nurse logs. And I have a friend who I don't know how long he's going to be on this earth.
Mm.
He's got a breathing tube and a feeding tube, and it's from consequences of radiation that saved his life 17 years ago from throat cancer. But we just sat in that park for a couple of hours and we just talked like we have done for, I don't know what, 25, 30 years.
Hmm.
And it just was wonderful.
Yeah.
And very life affirming, even though we were talking about the fact that he's not going to be around forever, and we don't know how long he is going to be around for.
Hmm.
It was a wonderful moment.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Also, thanks for reminding me about Schmitz Park. I don't go there enough, and
It's a great
it's
park.
very
It's
beautiful.
a
Yeah.
great park.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It was just such a pleasure to get an advanced copy of this book and delight in it, and also to have you on for this conversation.
I'm really glad. And, people hear the podcast, they actually can order, they go to the site, they can order copies in advance, ideally from a local bookstore. But I've got lots of links for that. And my hope is that the book gives people courage. And I
Well,
think
it
it will.
certainly gave me a dose of it this week, so thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks so much for doing this.
Well, Nora, I gotta say, I mean, that was the conversation that I knew I needed, and I'm glad we had.
Agreed. Some weeks the universe just provides, and
Yes,
this
it
was definitely
does.
one of them. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Nora, I know like this week I'll say for me personally, it was just hard to find any
Yeah. Yeah.
level of joy. I mean, there's just so much grief, so much everything this this week. I've had to stop myself from crying so much
Hmm.
on,
Mm.
being interviewed on the radio about the shooting that happened at the Bite of Seattle, and just also then thinking of the asymmetric compassion that we give some communities, when it comes to, whose death seems to elevate to the level of, national news, and who's, is treated as a normal Tuesday. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to find joy this week, but finding it in my little small terrier dog, Piglet, who has a new blue sweater. And it's just, a friend of mine always says,
We're definitely gonna need a picture, Marcus.
I will
You
send it
can't
on.
tease us with that and not give us a picture.
I will send it on. Maybe we'll put it in the notes or on our Instagram
Okay.
stories. But yeah, just the days where you just, the world can be literally on fire and the city can be up in arms, and she just lands on your chest, and she just wants to play with her little squeaky toy, and that's all she wants is just your time.
Yeah.
And for 5 minutes, there's nothing else in the world but you and this little dog. So anyway, that's my joy for the week. But what is yours, Nora?
Thank goodness for dogs everywhere. Seriously. Keeping us alive, if not sane. So mine actually, I never thought I would say this, has to do with a GOP Republican leader in Missouri. And it kind of relates to a point that Paul was making this week, about how sometimes you never know what impact your actions can have, and like the kind of rippling out of those actions. So this week, GOP-led Senate Republicans in Missouri signed a GOP-sponsored elections law that is going to restore voting rights to 40,000 Missourians who are currently on probation or parole. And the really lovely part of this story is that the bill was largely championed by Republican State Representative Melanie Stinnett, who has often said publicly that she was convinced of the importance of reenfranchising her own constituents while knocking doors on the campaign trail and knocking on the door of a man who had been disenfranchised because of his jail time. And she, just had a conversation with this person and realized that he deserved to have a vote. And she was especially swayed by the evidence that restoring voting rights to former felons actually dramatically decreases recidivism because it enables them to feel like they're a welcome and valued part of their communities. So she championed this bill and it passed. And in a state like Missouri, which has also been doing like crazy gerrymandering and all kinds of shenanigans.
Yes, it has.
But yeah, 40,000 people are going to be able to vote in the upcoming election who wouldn't have otherwise been able to, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is very awesome, and that is a victory and a triumph. Maybe a small one, as Paul would say, but one that has.
And see, I will even give Republicans their flowers when they deserve them.
There you go. We are nonpartisan in that way. Well, with that being said, Nora, shall we bid adieu for this week?
Yeah. Well, folks, if this week has you stress eating through your snack cabinet faster than Anthropic is consuming books, you are definitely in good company. Huge thanks to Paul Loeb for joining us this week and reminding us that hope is not naivety. It's a discipline. It's one you keep practicing even when the evidence is stacked against you, especially when it's stacked against you.
Yeah. Now, Mitch, that doesn't mean we want you getting all spry on us again, but this book is not for you. But thanks as well to Jessica Partnow, our producer, who takes the impossible each week, by which I mean us, and turns it into an hour of hope, not despair. And a shout out to Ahamaluo for the music that carries us through.
Speaking of things that require perseverance, we need your support. As an independent, ad-free podcast, we're sustained by listeners who believe conversations like this one matter. You can help keep them going with a one-time gift or monthly contribution.
Yes, you absolutely can. Also, please make sure to follow In the Meanwhile on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. You can find us also on YouTube, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads, and on whatever demonic social media platforms still have you in their thrall. We're on the radio Wednesdays at 5 p.m. on KBRU, and new episodes drop every single Friday.
Until then, stop checking your phone and go check on your local librarian or a friend. We will see you in the meanwhile.